Hello, and thanks for tuning in to hear our conversation today with Sasho Cirovski, head coach of the University of Maryland men's soccer team. My name is Eric McAleer, and I'm the general manager of World Stride Sports Division. Our Starting 11 speaker series is based around conversations with some of the top minds in the world of football with a specific interest around leadership, culture, and their coaching journey. I'm excited to welcome Sasho to share some of his experiences, insights, and reflections with our global community. I've known Sash since 1997 when I landed here in the US, fresh off the boat, and worked his soccer camp early June 97. We've been great friends ever since. We've played golf together in Scotland. We've travelled internationally a number of times with his teams, and it's certainly been a joy for me to be around them all those times. Just to keep Sash, giving him his background, he's had an incredible journey following a highly successful 2 years at the University of Hartford. Sash moved to Maryland and turned the men's program into one of the preeminent top programs in the country with 3 national championships, 24 postseason appearances, 2 Big Ten regular season championships, and a host of other titles. On top of that, on the player side, is 40-plus players selected for the MLS draft, 2 number 1 picks, 2 MLS Rookie of the Year selections, and a National Freshman of the Year. Don't know if I've missed anything, but Sash, anyway, great to see you. Always a pleasure. My big concern here is how do we keep this conversation less than 3 hours? As I said in our warm-up, I don't know if there's anybody I've talked to more about leadership and culture and coaching than yourself and or your brother, and I'm so excited to see you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Great to be with you and the World Strides family.
It's great to see your face as always, Sash, and excited just to dig straight into this and looking forward to going back to your early days. You and I have talked about it often, growing up in Canada. The profile was on you. You were the top high school player in Canada as you were coming out of high school, and certainly probably, as a kid on that you're one of us now because of the amount of time you spent in Scotland. But I look back to your early part of your journey and your early days going over to Aberdeen as a high school player, and what do you take from that, and how do you look back on those years, Sash?
Well, yeah, it was a very interesting journey. I was born in Macedonia, and I was about 7, 8 years old. We moved to Canada, and lucky I ended up in Windsor, Ontario, in a very immigrant-heavy population. And one of my coaches in high school was a guy named Tom Deary, a Scottish fellow, and of course, the big Scottish influence in all of Ontario, and Windsor was no different. We were a melting pot of Europe, and thankfully soccer was a preeminent sport. I mean, we played every sport, but we played soccer. So Tom Deary happened to be childhood friends of a gentleman named Alec Ferguson. Sure enough, as my career developed and as he thought that maybe I could have a future in the game, one day he brings me in and he says, hey, are you interested in going over to Scotland for a trial? I'm like, yeah, sure, of course. The only thing I knew about Scotland was like everybody else, Rangers and Celtic. And he said, he grew up in Glasgow with Sir Alec Ferguson. So, a couple months later, I get an offer to go train with Aberdeen in the summer of 1980. And I got there, I think early July, got picked up at the airport. Was it Prestwick Airport?
Prestwick Airport.
Prestwick Airport. And sure enough, Aberdeen had been playing Morton that evening. And I met up with the team at the airport, had lunch with them, sat and watched the game, and then took a bus ride back after the game, stopped for fish and chips, had a few spirits along the way, stayed in the same house with Dougie Rugby back then. And I was supposed to be there for a 2-week trial. Yeah. After 6 weeks of living in Aberdeen, and honestly, I loved it. Of course, I was there in the 6 weeks that the weather was good the whole year.
Oh, yeah.
I was offered the opportunity to stay there and play with the reserves, which was an incredible reserve team. I mean, you and I have spoken. I mean, this was, Neil Cooper, Neil Simpson,
Eric Black, John Hewitt.
Eric Black, Ian Angus. I mean, this was a great group of talent, and I didn't realize that this was, like the Man United class of '92. This was Scotland's version of this incredible group of players. But, I just fell in love with my stay at Aberdeen. and we trained, twice a day. We went to the local park there, and I took notes of Sir Alec back then. I wrote down every practice session we had. I remember the effect it had on me has resonated so much because the kind of stature, the presence that Sir Alec had. I mean, he was known as the boss, they called him boss when he walked into the locker room. And he was just in charge of everything. And the respect, the aura, the presence, and the way he treated me. I was a young, Macedonian Canadian kid who came over for a trial, and he treated me like, I was one of his own. And it left an impression on me, really. And it was at the core of who I'd become as a coach. Yeah. Kind of going through that experience at 17 years old into this, great, cauldron of Aberdeen in its heyday when they were winning the Cup Winners' Cup, beating Real Madrid and becoming the face of Scottish soccer. And somehow I was in there and I was among these great players. And so that was my first experience in Scotland. And you and I have been back so many times now. It's got a special place in my heart. And it was a special part of who I am today.
And I think, it's great that you went there and just the early things. As soon as you come out with aura and presence, and I immediately think, when you say those words, I think of Sir Alex Ferguson, and again, you and I have had many conversations about these, and, the conversations that you and I, you've certainly studied them, and you've looked at his ways and his journey, and you've tried to bed a lot of that into your, to your skill set and to your traits and your, the manner in which you lead. And I remember that a conversation you and I had at one time way back, and I don't know if you remember, you kind of saw yourself as the Sir Alex Ferguson mold. And the quote you made to me was Jay Vidovich was more in the Arsene Wenger mold. And Jay Vidovich and I actually had that conversation, and he loved it. He loved it, and he loved the analogy, and he thought that was so right on the money. And I'm sure that you look back and you've seen that as such an integral part of your journey.
Absolutely. I mean, I like to consider the University of Maryland as the Manchester United of American college soccer. And there's no doubt in my mind that, being around Sir Alec at that age and following the Aberdeen teams, following the Man United teams, watching his journey. I've read all of his books, spent a decent amount of time with him as well. In fact, if you go 13 years beyond 1980, when I took the University of Maryland job, the first place I went to for 2 weeks was to go spend time at Man United. And I showed up there unannounced at the Cliff training ground. And somehow word got out that there was this American-Canadian visitor who somehow knew Sir Alec, and the parking attendant goes inside. Next thing you know, Sir Alec is walking out in the parking lot, bringing me back on. And I went there unannounced. I was just going to simply try to observe, watch a bunch of games. And all of a sudden he comes in 13 years later. And he brings me on like I'm his long-lost son. And we spend, everything's open door. He says, "What are you doing today?" I said, "Well, I was just going to go back, take a nap, and maybe go catch the Liverpool match tonight." He said, "No, you're coming with me." So myself, him, and Eric Harrison get in the car, and we go to watch the reserves of the youth team play Tranmere Rovers that day. And the next day, I'm sitting in the locker room after the Liverpool match, at the I think it was the Cliff. We're sitting and talking youth soccer. We're talking everything else. And Bobby Clark, who you had earlier on, was a dear friend of mine who we have a great history with. He was there with the regional Olympic development team from the U.S. So all of a sudden, the three of us are sitting there reunited and talking soccer. And Alec was very interested in the 1994 World Cup in the U.S. So we connected about him coming over. And it was just an amazing thing. But for me, Eric, what I remember was the authenticity and the willingness to connect, even with someone like me. And that's left a lasting impression on me. And, whenever I get the opportunity to help young coaches or to return a phone call or to do whatever I can for someone that's been somehow in my past, I always do it because I've never forgotten how generous he was with his time and his knowledge. I spent a lot of time those 2 weeks kind of watching closely, speaking of Paul McGuinness and watching that whole group and studying everything. And I'm very proud when I compare the University of Maryland as the Manchester United of college soccer, because so many of our standards and the way that we do things are based upon his leadership style and the way his teams play. with passion and with a directness and a way that the fans love to watch play and the way training sessions are run. So he's had a massive influence on me, even though maybe not as direct as some of his coaches.
But I think also to that piece, I know how competitive you are. I've known you a long, long time. And I also look at, when you talk about Sir Alex, and I've read all his books as well, and everybody, the first thing they all say is how competitive he is. But for as long as I've known you, even I've played golf with you, you're unbelievably competitive. And I know that kind of filters through to your teams, that there's an underlying desire to win, but to do all the right things in the right ways.
Yeah, I think so. I think, look, you don't get to the status of Sir Alex or have the success I've had, on a relative scale if you're not hyper competitive. I mean, I think that's a quality that you must have. But it comes down to the leadership and the ability now to connect with the people around you, put together various teams, whether it's a staff or a team, and get them to go and succeed. And it always starts with, as a leader, you have to conceive what you want. Okay, then you have to believe that it can be done, and then you have to get the group to understand that they can achieve it. And so, the idea of conceiving it, believing it, achieving it, that has to start with you. And I can, I know when he was there at Aberdeen, I know when he went to Man United, there was an element of him that we are going to be the best team. In Europe, or best team in England. And it's the same thing. When I got to University of Hartford, you mentioned my first head coaching job in 1991. I took over a team that was irrelevant, a bunch of misfits, but talented. I remember walking in that locker room and saying, we are going to make the NCAA tournament next year. And they laughed. But there's a process involved, helping them develop as better people, making sure they understand what the standards, the principles, the training sessions, that are all connected, the relationships off the field that we had to work at, the nurturing had to happen. We made the Sweet 16 that year, barely lost to the best team of all time, the University of Virginia at the time. And we got there because I was so believable in that we're going to do it. That I was able to make sure they understood what they're capable of more than they thought they were going to. And I feel like that's kind of what Sir Alex does. Is that he has this belief in him that, hey, we're going to get this done.
But I think your comparison, what you just described there, when you took the Maryland job, Maryland was was certainly not a high-profile program at that time when you stepped into the Maryland job, and neither really was Manchester United when he took it. Obviously, it was a big profile, it was a big club, but it certainly weren't punching at their full weight. And there's probably a comparison to when you took the Maryland job. They were down in the middle of the pack. You were in your late 20s. It was a big job. There was a lot of expectation, and I think that's there's a lot of comparison there too.
They were not even in the middle of the pack. They were at the bottom of the pack.
I was trying to be nice there.
But the important thing was that Maryland did have a history. In the 60s, they were national champions, and they were one of the elite programs in American college soccer. And at that point, there was a heavy immigrant population. But then they went through a dark period, a dead period. And so I have to come now and like I did at Hartford, is reimagine the goals and elevate the whole program. And sometimes, as a coach, you take risks. I mean, I was very public to whoever would listen, whether it was the media, my players, the fans, my bosses. I said, we're going to be the best team in the country. I didn't put a time frame on it. We're going to be the best team in the country. So I took over a 3-14 team, a 5-12 team, and we actually got worse. In my first year, we were 3-14-1. But in that, I follow something called the law of the harvest, right? So you reap what you sow, and whether it's growing up in a farm in Macedonia or maybe seeing the farms in Scotland or maybe living in Wisconsin, I sort of understood how that works. So we really start to make sure that we planted the right seeds and that we brought in good seeds for new crops. So we started to understand that, maybe our harvest might take 1, 2, or 3 years to be really, really relevant. Well, within a year, Eric, we went 14-6-1. We got to the Sweet 16 of the national championship. We had the biggest turnaround in the history of the Atlantic Coast Conference, which is the best conference for college soccer. And all of a sudden, we were on a national map. And 2 years later, we win the ACC championship I guess, the University of Virginia, which was the team we were chasing.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we were there. But it's, I think that, understanding of, as Sir Alex always puts it, you've got to recruit the right people.
Yeah.
You got to get the ones who are here better. And then for the ones that disqualify themselves from the team, you got to find a way to push them off to the side.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have to do all those things in a very delicate way where you maintain your culture and your chemistry and where you're fair throughout the process. And that's the stuff that, as I watched the way he built teams, I understood that within our framework to do that.
And I think, as we talk about leadership is, again, I've known you a long, long time. And one of the traits that jumps out to me always, whether you've won 3 national titles or not, is one of the things that always jumps out to me about you is your work ethic and your ability to work hard, and that's never waned any. I look at where you are today. I look at where you are 20 odd years ago when I first met you, and you don't stop, but that's for the pursuit of excellence. And that, that always jumped out at me. And I'm sure that's just part of your fabric.
It is. I think, thankfully, I come from a very hardworking Macedonian family, and that's what I understood. You have to work for everything. But just like the law of the harvest, you reap what you sow and you get rewarded. And, I've had an incredibly rewarding life. I have a great family. I live a very, very good life. But, excellence is the key of everything. So, when we get together with my team, we say the word excellence. And you hear that all of the time. There's a passion for excellence within our program. So I demand that from myself. And if I don't demand that from myself, there's no way I can demand it from the players on every passing activity, every finishing activity, every training, every game. So in order to really demand it, I have to live it. So I try to live a life of excellence in all ways, shapes, and forms, whether it's trying to stay fit or because the quality of my leadership has to be very, very good if I expect that from my players. So I spend a lot of time on my personal development, constantly trying to learn, and I'm watching all the speaker series that you're putting on, trying to learn from some of the great minds you're putting on. I mean, that's a part of who we are. We try to find ways to get better, maybe to say something a little differently, we're all thieves of ideas. And But yeah, excellence is a key component of who we are. It's the standards of excellence that determine the kind of culture that you have and how you uphold those standards at all times. You hear Mike Krzyzewski talk about that, the famous Duke basketball coach. You hear Alec Ferguson. I think any coach that is successful really understands what excellence really means and how they have to demand it and cultivate it on a continuing basis.
And I think also, again, knowing you well, is I've always seen you as one of the great innovators, because you've always tried to continually innovate. I remember sitting in your office in the late 90s, probably 98, 99, and you and I were having a tactical systems conversation. And I remember we were having a discussion about 3-6-1, and I remember the players that you had at that time, and you were getting absolutely passionate and in depth. And I'd never understood a 3-6-1. But you literally gave me a lecture, an insight to this 3-6-1, and the players that you had, that was the Leo Collins and the Keith Beach and the Artie Moores and the Pierre Venderi and players like that, just top quality players. But you were looking to break the norm or break the boundaries based around the players that you had at that time.
Yeah, I think you always have to play to the strengths of your players. And if you look at right now, Man City's made, Pep Guardiola's teams with a version of a 3-4-3, which is essentially a 3-6-1, if you look at it. But you look at the strengths of your players, and in that particular team, I had 2 really great wing backs with Matt Larson and Jason Bent. I had 4 really good central midfielders, 2 more tucked in attacking midfielders, 2 really good holding midfielders. It was Keith Beach and Judah Cooks playing in holding mid. I had Shane Norton and Stevie Armas playing the attacking mid. I mean, I had a team that was perfectly fit. So you find your teams and you put them out there, 11 players, and how can you get the best qualities of your best players on display? And I'm telling you, that was one of the great teams I've had in Maryland. It was a 1996 3-6-1 team. And the funny thing is, right now, and look, I've won 3 titles playing 3 different systems right now.
Yeah.
We played a 4-4-2 diamond. We've won out of a 4-3-3. And we've won out of a a flag 4-4-2. So we've won 3 national titles out of 3 different systems. So I think as a coach, you have to be flexible. And it's not about the system, it's about the philosophy.
Yeah.
And it's about the principles that you believe in. Every once in a while you have to switch. As an example, right now, the 4-3-3, we almost have to play that partly because this is what the whole U.S. Development Academy and all the kids coming through are going out playing. So it's a little bit easier for them to transition, understand their roles in that situation. So, you're a product of your environment, but you also have to create your own environment.
Of course, yeah. And I think looking back through the 20 plus years I've followed your program, one of the things that jumps out to me is some of the absolute special players, but also special people and special leaders that have come out of the Maryland factory. I'm sure you look back with a lot of pride, Sash, and you think back to the national team players, but you also think back to those, non too high profile players that you came in and became a Maryland player, and maybe didn't have all the attention, or maybe was not getting, recruited by all the top programs, but you brought them in that were maybe a little bit of a rough diamond, and you turned them into a Maryland player. And, I think back to your 20 plus years, and there's many of them, and I'm sure that gives you, as much satisfaction to this day.
It does. I follow all of my players in all of their pursuits, whether it's, the ones that went on to play World Cups and MLS or even in Europe, to the players that, chose a different path and maybe didn't play. We have some great players that could have played professionally, but decided to enter the workforce earlier as well. And I try to keep in touch with all of them as much as possible. One of the reasons I think I've been successful as a coach is that, the American college system, it's an incredible laboratory for kids ages 18 to 22. And you take them from boyhood to manhood. And it's an opportunity for them to really find out who they are on and off the field, to be able to have some influence in the way that they develop as people. And whether it's, discussions on bus rides or after training or having them, go through these adverse moments, whether it's injury or being benched or having personal travails, going on, and helping them navigate those things and then become who they are. I mean, that's an incredible responsibility, and it's an incredible opportunity. And I take that very seriously. And just like if you go back to the gentleman, Tom Deary, who was my Scottish youth coach, he was a teacher. Look at Bobby Clark. Bobby Clark is a teacher. I'm a teacher. Highly competitive in an American college system. I get to enjoy the competitive side and the high level results side. But I also really love being a teacher and love seeing the ability to to see kids flourish and become who they are. I mean, one of the things I'm most proud of, you mentioned some of the soccer accomplishments. We've had Rookies of the Year, national team players, MLS Best 11s over and over. We've also had 3 players in the 20-plus year history of the MLS be the humanitarians of the year.
Yeah. So
think about that. From one university, out of 20 years, 3 of them played at the University of Maryland. And they're the humanitarians of the year. Yeah. Because they were able to do things and serve communities and be role models in ways beyond the soccer field. And that brings an incredible amount of pride to me. Yeah. Of what we're doing is bigger than just winning championships.
Yeah. And going back to Sir Alex Ferguson, I read one of his earlier books when he took the St. Mirren job. And the St. Mirren job was one of the lower clubs back in his early days, Sash. And one of the things he took upon himself was to kind of market the team. So he used to go out and about and talk up his job and go to the supporters clubs, and he built up the profile of that club. And it was an underperforming team in the first division at that time. Now let's fast forward, 30 years, and I watched the UMD crew. I watched the crew. I watched the atmosphere. I love coming down to your games on a Friday night, and there's 6,000 people there. And again, I can relate that to what Alex Ferguson did with St. Mirren. You take that upon yourself as you want to create the best college atmosphere in the country. Yes. For your student athletes, for your players, for your team, for your program. And by God, do you do that?
Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand that unless maybe things have changed now at the very highest levels where you're the manager or a coach, but certainly when Sir Alex was coaching St. Mirren and even in his early days at Man United, and when you're a college coach, you're the CEO, or excuse me, the COE, you're the chief of everything.
Yeah.
So you're the head of marketing, you're the head of grounds, you're the head of equipment, you're the head of everything. Because if you're not involved in those areas, they may not get done. So I have a master's degree in business. I'm constantly known as an idea guy, an innovator, find different ways. Well, when I got to Maryland, even the parents didn't come to see the games. There'd be like 40, 50 people at games. And I said, this isn't the way this is going to be. I want overflow, standing room only crowd. I want to build a team that people want to pay for, that want to watch. But at the same time, I demanded. I remember having a big argument with our grounds guy. I think it was my second year in, and the field was crap. It was terrible. And I went in, I really dug into it. And I said, there's no way in hell I'll let my team play here. And he, initially, he took offense to it.
Yeah.
And then eventually he got the field done. Because I told him, I said, we're going to be the best team in the country, and my players deserve better. Well, the next year when I think we won the AC tournament, or maybe the NCAA tournament, he came to my office at the bottom of the line and said, I love you, man. He goes, you made me better. You forced me to do my job. And thank you. And his name was Bunk Carter, the head of grounds. It's the same thing with the marketing people. Before, I have a marketing person that helps me now, but my players became salesmen. My staff became marketing, supervisors. We whatever it took, we would go into the dorms and have pizza parties. I would speak to people. We'd find different ways, and we wanted to connect with them. In the same way a coach connects with his players, I wanted our team to connect with the students at the university, with the community. I wanted people to know the kind of good kids these are and that they're worth watching. So we did all that stuff. And eventually, now they're standing room only games. It's packed houses.
And what a phenomenal experience. Just I love the old concept of Friday night lights. And there's nothing I love more than going to a Maryland game at College Park on a Friday night against some top 10 team in the country, which you very regularly do. And, for a Maryland student athlete who's not even in the program yet, to go and experience that, maybe you're recruiting, to go and have that experience, that's a slam dunk right there. And just to fast forward from there, I think once you get them in the program, they also have that continual feeling of excellence. When I look at your facilities, I look at your stadium, I look at, those two soccer goals that you've got at either corner of the, of your field. And those are both when you won the national title, and it's got the starting 11 and the full squad from the national title. Once you get in, you can only have that feeling of excellence.
Yeah, I think, let me tell you a story I think your listeners might appreciate. Maurice Edu played for me. Obviously, some of your listeners will know Maurice went on and played at Glasgow Rangers for 4 seasons and was a beloved figure there. So Maurice comes from Southern California, and getting kids to leave Southern California for University of Maryland or to go to anywhere in Europe is pretty hard. So I remember sitting with Maurice and I said, so what do you want, Maurice? He says, I want to play in Europe. I said, oh, great. Well, we're halfway to Europe, young man. so I got him to come to Maryland. But then beyond that, part of my responsibility is to get these kids ready for what might be next. So, if this kid was going to play in Europe, then I wanted to create an environment where there's going to be fans and there's going to be, television, there's going to be responsibility and all of those things. So when Maurice played at Maryland for 3 years and won a national title, his first year he went to Toronto, and Toronto FC became one of the better environment places in the U.S. But his transition from Maryland to Toronto was easy because he had already knew how to play in front of crowds. Yeah. He knew what it meant to win and deal with media and all of those things. But creating that kind of environment kind of reminds me of a quote I always talk about: is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. In other words, I wanted my players to know that I care about their experience. What do players want to do? They want to perform. They want to play. They want to play under the bright lights and under the television cameras. Yeah. So I want to make sure that we were the proving ground. We want to be the New York City of college soccer. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. Yeah. So that's what we've done. Yeah.
And that's the part that, I know you do this on your recruiting trails is, when you look at your program, I look at Maurice Edu as an example. He was certainly a raw young player when he came in. I think I remember him playing up top a little bit when he came in, and he still had some rough edges to be taken off.
Well, you saw him right at the very beginning because he came in 2004, and we were with your tour company.
Correct.
We were in England. We were playing Crew Alexandra in the first game.
That's right.
And I think we ended up winning that game, surprising them 2-0. And Maurice, at that point he was a wide midfielder, and he sort of was very graceful, two-footed player. He sort of flowed through a field the way water does, with the path of least resistance. He was very smooth. But he was a wiry kid. He was just a boy, and you could see the talent, but there was so much lacking. He had no idea what it meant to work really hard, to really compete on every play, to really even understand how good he could be. And I remember over the first year or two, I had to really kind of push him, because I think he always thought things would be pretty easy because he had a certain amount of talent. And but then to see how much he grew every year, and then to see the career that he went on and had, it's one of those things where you're just feeling
so much satisfaction. And I'm going to come clean here, Sasha. I'm going to tell you an honest truth that I don't know if I've ever told you before. So on that trip, 2004, you played Crew Alexandra, you won 2-0. You played Accrington Stanley, you won 4-0. And I've always got this unwritten rule: when you take a program over to Europe, you always want them to be around 500. And I'd set up 5 games for you. And here we're leaving Manchester. I'm on the bus with you. We're going up to Scotland. And your first game in Scotland was against Glasgow Celtic. And you probably remember that Tommy Burns was coaching the team.
Yeah, I remember that.
And Glasgow Celtic played a fairly young team, probably 17s, a few 18s. And I'm driving up to Scotland, and it just so happens there was an A license going on at the same time on the same facility. And every big name in Scotland was there watching this game. University of Maryland against Glasgow Celtic. And I remember the particular game. Dominic Media was exceptional this particular day. But anyway, long story short is you beat Glasgow Celtic 2-0. So here I am, you've got 5 games, you've won the first 3, and I am not happy, because I cannot have Sasho Cirovski going over the UK and winning 5 games out of 5. So I've never told you this story before. So I get on the phone, and your last 2 games were against Hearts and Kilmarnock.
Yes.
And I called my friends at Hearts and I said, look, we need to step up the game here, pull some of your big dogs out. And if you remember the game in Edinburgh against Hearts, it was very, very close. I think they beat you 4-3, but they had 3 internationals playing. They had Michael Stewart, they had Jamie McAllister, they had 3 international players playing. They beat you by 1 goal, and it was a very, very tight game. Craig Levine was the manager at the time. And then the last game, I had spoken to Jim Jeffries and Billy Brown, and Kilmarnock played their full first team, and you were out of gas by that point, and they beat you by a couple. But I use that story a lot, and I don't know that I've ever told you, but I pulled in a couple of favours just to get the scoring a little better than what it was setting out to be. But I remember it like yesterday. But again, it kind of tells you that was back in 2004, and it tells you, those were some top teams. Hearts and Kilmarnock were Premier League international players, and the subsequent trips that we've done with you also. I distinctly remember, Man United going to Carrington with your program in 2014, and gave them a phenomenal game. Zach Steffen was in goals. And I think the game ended up 0-0 at Carrington.
Yeah, it was 0-0 game.
Yeah, and we went down. It was a very tight game against Tottenham. And then your last game was against Crystal Palace, and you absolutely put on a clinic that day. And you ended up, you tied the game 3-3. But again, it's always, I get excited when I talk about those games and those memories, because that's the standard that you've set through the years.
Yeah, I think, and even on the last trip we went with you recently, we played Leicester City under 23s and beat them. Was it 3-0?
It was 3-0, and Paul Ben scored 2.
Yeah, it was 3-0. We beat them, and we beat Queens Park Rangers 5-0.
Correct.
Under 23. So I think I feel good about the fact that we've shown well for college soccer, and I think the sort of the holistic environment of the college game, I think, is growing. It's getting better. I'm working every day, as you know, to try to make it better and better. But these kids are pros. I mean, they're young professionals. They're very mature. They're good soccer players, and they and many of them go on and play MLS, USL, or in parts of Europe as well. But to see that happen and to see how much we've grown, I still remember the Tommy Burns coming up to us after we beat Celtics 6-0 and really apologized and said, "You're not a typical American college team."
Yes,
I am so sorry. I should have put an older team against you, and I thought, fair enough, I appreciate it. But it was
an exceptional
really
team.
nice compliment. Yeah.
You know, I remember many of the players from that. That was Ian Rodway and Jason Gary and Dominic Midier, and you know, again, just an exceptional team and some fantastic people, as well as good players that came out of that program. You know, they were just very, and I was with you the whole time, and just exceptional people.
Yeah.
I think just to wrap up here, Sash, and this has been fantastic, bringing loads of great memories. I actually know that the answer to this question, but I want to throw it out there for our people. What would you like your legacy to be at the University of Maryland? You know, when time moves on, when you get to 87 and you feel as if you're maybe considering retirement, but what would you see your legacy to be at the University of Maryland, and what will the program look like post Sasho?
That's a great question. You know, I haven't thought about it too deeply, to be fair, in terms of, you know, I'd like to be remembered as someone that stayed at Maryland, that didn't jump, whether it's to MLS or other colleges, had many opportunities. You know this more than the listeners. The University of Maryland's had some challenges over the years, whether it's financially or different things, and a lot of coaches in other sports have left, but I've stayed there because I felt like if I was going to leave something of a legacy, then I need to be at one place for a long time. I didn't want to be a person that went for the next gig all the time. And if I was going to have some influence, I needed to be there a while, in the same way that Sir Alex was there for a while. You know, he's known as the Man United manager. So I feel like maybe my loyalty would be one thing that would be important. Secondly, is I want to leave the place a lot better. You know, when I got to Maryland, soccer was pretty relevant. When I leave, I want to have that stadium built that I've been pushing. We did announce a $25 million, 8,000 seat stadium earlier this year. Obviously, with the COVID crisis, that's going to be slowed down a little bit, but that will get done before I leave the University of Maryland. I'm also a strong believer, as I tell my players when they first walk in the door, it's important to leave wherever you are better than when you first got here. So I certainly want to leave Maryland better, but I want to leave college soccer better. As you know, I've worked my whole life to make college soccer better, whether it's getting the television package for Friday Night Lights on Fox many years ago, whether it's hiring Rob Kehoe to be the program director for college soccer. And now we're working on trying to make a better playing and practice season schedule that plays over 2 semesters and really change the way NCAA sports are looked at from a playing and practice season schedule. It's a revolutionary idea. It's a transformative idea. We were close to getting it pushed over just this past week, but now it's been put on pause for a while. So my legacy is I'd like to be known as someone who cared deeply about his players, who cared about his school, and who cares about the game. And if somehow I can be remembered for those things, then I'll be quite happy.
That is a pretty darn good finish there, Sash. You know, that was an absolute pleasure and a joy just to steal some of your time today. And, you know, every time I get together with you, I always feel those same goosebumps. So thank you so much for being with us today. And, you know, I again, always love our conversations and just thanks for being a part of this, and continued health and stay safe to you and your family, Sash.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks for allowing me to be part of the Scotland family. And, you know, I have played 3 British Open courses. And
I know you have.
I've been to Scotland many times. So I am married to a Higgins. So I think there's some Scottish blood somewhere. So.
And just remind me, so you played Turnberry in 2004 and you won the national title in 2005.
Yeah.
Then you played St. Andrews and Carnoustie with me in 2014. You won it in 2015?
No, we played in 2017.
17, sorry, that's what it was. And then, so I think
we played in spring of 2018, and then we won.
Spring of 18 it was, and then you won it in the fall. That's what it was. And I feel
yes, we're going back to Scotland.
Routine. That's got to be
going back to Scotland.
I love it. Sash, great to see you as always. Take care, be safe, and thanks so much for joining us.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.